Prince Albert had requested that no memorials be raised in his honour, but Queen Victoria was determined that he would never be forgotten. Across the country statues were erected, and no family occasion could be celebrated without the presence of beloved Albert in one artistic form or another. There is no doubt at all that the Queen's grief was genuine. Not only had she relied upon Albert for everything, but she also loved him deeply. But in her excessive mourning, the effects of his death on their children is sometimes overlooked. Due to his escapade with the actress in Ireland, the Queen held her eldest son Bertie responsible for the prince's demise, and she recorded that she shuddered to look at him in the immediate months following Prince Albert's death. The young man, who had always seen himself as a disappointment to his parents, undoubtedly felt a sense of his own unworthiness more acutely than ever. Vicky, who was in Prussia at the time of her father's passing, felt even more isolated. "Why does the earth not swallow me up?" she wrote desperately to Queen Victoria, while for her younger siblings, who were still at home, the happy atmosphere in which they had been raised was transformed overnight, as though a dark and immovable cloud had descended over them. As the Queen saw it as unseemly if they should dare to laugh or smile in the midst of her grief, an air of gloom pervaded the palaces. Lenchen, once the outgoing tomboy, withdrew into herself. Leopold, who might have had more opportunities to extend himself had his father lived, was more confined than ever, and 4-year-old Beatrice, once a bright little child, found herself growing up in an atmosphere of mourning and despair. It was upon Alice, however, that the burden fell most heavily. It was she who had nursed the prince through his last illness, and now, as her mother was so consumed with grief that she was incapable of carrying out her duties, Alice took responsibility for everything. Caring for the Queen in this way, the princess, who had been particularly close to her father, hardly had time to express her own sorrow, and to make matters worse, she had recently become engaged to the heir of the Grand Duke of Hesse-Darmstadt. Were it not for the fact that Prince Albert had approved of the forthcoming marriage, and the Queen insisted that everything that he had planned should be carried out, the wedding might have been postponed. As it was, just 7 months after the Prince's death, Alice was married in the dining-room of Osborne House, in a ceremony that bore closer resemblance to a funeral than a wedding. The Queen, sobbing behind a curtain, could not bear to be seen. Alice's younger siblings sobbed too, and even the recently widowed Archbishop, who presided over the service, wept copiously. Perhaps, though, it was a relief for Alice to be free from the gloom that continued to surround the Queen, for Victoria's mourning continued for weeks and months and years. At first, the British people had felt for her grief, but as time passed, and she remained in isolation at Windsor, refusing to return to London to open Parliament or to carry out any public duties, opinions began to change. Republicans seized the opportunity of furthering their cause. Of what use is a queen who is never seen? A satirical sign was even fastened to the gates of Buckingham Palace, saying that the place was to let, since the occupier was no longer in residence. No amount of persuasion from her family or her ministers could urge the Queen from her seclusion, and it is this period of her life which gives rise to the impression of Victoria as a dour and humourless woman. In time, however, she did emerge, and she discovered that her popularity was greater than ever, and, although Albert would always remain the great love of her life, he was not the only man who would ever capture her heart.